Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and I'm joined today by Tomer. This is always one of my favorite videos every set release. I have so much fun talking to Tomer about Commander cards. How's it going, Tomer?
Hey Seth, how's it going? Yeah, I love this set too.
So, are you excited for Kaladesh?
I was surprised at how much I liked it because Conspiracy 2 just came out, right? And that is a love letter to multiplayer and also Commander players. And then we get Kaladesh, and I wasn't expecting so much from it, but it definitely blew me away on specifically some of the cards.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it too. It seems like there's actually quite a bit of good multiplayer stuff in the set, which, like you said, I wasn't necessarily expecting on the back of Conspiracy, just because Conspiracy was so good, it would be hard for Kaladesh to live up to that standard, but I think it actually has, so I'm excited for it. So today we're going to be counting down Tomer's top 10 commander cards from Kaladesh. But first, I know, Tomer, you wanted to mention an honorable mention before we get to the top 10. So take it away.
Yep. Honorable mention goes to an entire archetype, basically energy counters. I didn't mention any of them on the top 10 list because while some of them are very powerful, like Aetherworks Marvel, and they're going to be big playmakers if we do get more energy counters in the future, right now, with just a single set, I don't think we have enough energy counters to make a full deck in a 99 card singleton format. So while we do have a lot of really good cards to set us up for an energy deck in the future, right now it's just not enough. So those are just going to be ignored for now, but they might be brought up in the future.
So, energy on the sidelines for now. We'll revisit that next set, but for now, we're going to talk about the top 10 cards from Commander, and let's jump into it with number 10. And it's kind of funny, at the very bottom of the list, we have the card that a lot of people are most excited about for Standard. It's the new Planeswalker, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. So, where does this fit in Commander, Tomer?
So initially, I was really, really hot on the new Chandra, but I've since cooled down after actually thinking about her a lot more. Chandra is going to be a very flexible version of what is really Outpost Siege. Her most relevant ability is just exiling the top card of your library and being able to cast it on your turn. And the other abilities, being able to ramp a bit, being able to pick off some utility creatures, and just pinging your opponents. These are all just little added bonuses that make her a more flexible and more just versatile card. But there's always the Planeswalker problem in Commander. In a multiplayer format, it's just more difficult for the Planeswalker to stick around. You have to defend them against just more threats, and their abilities are slow, and they kind of need to stay around for a couple turns to get real value out of them. So Chandra still suffers from that in the multiplayer format, but the fact that she can give you card advantage in decks that are hurting for it, like Mono Red and Boros, makes her at least appealing. I would say she's about on par with Outpost Siege, a card that I really like because of her added flexibility. But the downside is that she's going to probably kick the bucket much faster than Outpost Siege generally would.
Yeah, Planeswalkers are a bit risky just because, like you mentioned, in Commander, you have three opponents. They potentially all have threats that can attack you. So not only in like Standard, you kind of just have to play a Planeswalker and protect it from one opponent. In Commander, you have three different opponents that can potentially attack, and there's a good chance that at least one of those opponents will have something that can get through damage. Plus, when you have potentially powerful permanents sitting on the battlefield, it kind of can make you a target. I don't know if Chandra is that good, but people have been probably misguidedly comparing her to Jace. And if people think of her as a Jace level planeswalker, you can bet that people are going to try to get her off the table really quick, even if she isn't that good. But if the perception is that she is a Jace the Mind Sculptor, people are going to try to kill it really quickly, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was definitely in that camp of the red Jason Mind Sculptor when she came out. I since lowered my expectations on her a bit, but yeah, if other people have that mindset, seeing her enter the battlefield, then it's definitely not going to work in her favor. Her ultimate is also quite powerful if you get to tick up to it in like 3 to 4 turns that actually cast it. So people will just want to get her off the board as quickly as possible. Also, if people just want to play creatures, protected creatures, they don't want to get them killed by her -3 potentially. So these are all things working against her. So it's just like how long until you actually get value out of her that she becomes worth it, and how long does she realistically stay on the board.
Moving on to number 9 on our list, we are heading from red to blue with one of my favorite cards in the set, Metallurgic Summoning. So, Tomer, what's your thoughts on this one?
So I love the Spellslinger archetype. It's one of my favorite ones. That's the one where you just focus on instants and sorceries and just slinging a bunch of spells. Mystics of the Magnus is a Spellslinger deck. Narset is sometimes a Spellslinger deck, Talrand, and so forth. And the one thing that instants and sorceries don't do very well, they do many, many things very well, but the one thing they don't do very well is protect your board. So many Spellslinger decks run into the issue where they're just dirtling around casting their instants and sorceries, and they have no board state, and their opponents are just free to kill them. And that's something you want to avoid, obviously, because if you get killed, you can't cast instant sorceries. Not so fun. So there's a bunch of cards that are not instants and sorceries that help you transform your instant sorceries into a board state to protect you so you can cast more instant sorceries. Talrand Sky Summoner is a classic example. When you cast an instant sorcery, you make a 2/2 flyer. There's Young Pyromancer, where you make a 1/1 token. There's a bunch of them that do the similar role. And Metallurgic Summonings is just another option to that. And I think it's one of the best options, because while they don't have flying like Talrand Sky Summoner, the creatures themselves are going to be overall bigger than 2/2s. And their artifacts, so if you have any artifact synergies like Metalcraft, you can abuse that. And then, once you run out of instants and sorceries to cast, you can use its activated ability to exile it and then return all the instant sorceries back from the graveyard to your hand, just refueling you. So it does basically both things that you want a support card to do. It puts a board state for you once you are casting instant sorceries. When you run out, it refuels you. So that is beautiful for a Spellslinger deck.
Yeah, Metallurgic Summonings does a ton of things I like, and I agree with everything you said about Spellslinger. I think it definitely works really well there. A couple of things I wanted to add is, for one thing, even in just a somewhat controlling deck with a lot of instants, just having a Metallurgic Summoning sitting on the battlefield is going to make it really risky for opponents to attack you. Like, they don't know if all of a sudden you can make a bunch of instant speed blockers and get this blowout. So in some ways, it's like playing a deck that has a bunch of flash creatures. So if you can just pass with mana up, it might prevent people from attacking you just because of the threat of what could happen and how they could get blown out if they decide to do that. The other thing is, I think this could work in a Storm deck as well. It's a little slow, but its second ability actually compares pretty well to Past in Flames. If you cast this the turn before and then untap with it, you just cast a bunch of spells. You're going to get the artifacts naturally from casting all those spells, plus you probably have some sort of mana rocks. Then, almost exactly like Past in Flames, you get to recast all of your instants and sorceries, plus, unlike Past in Flames, they can actually synergize together because you're not exiling those cards when you flash them back. You get them back to your hand, you can cast them all again, and then Past in Flames could allow you to cast them a third time. So I think there's some potential in combo builds as well, where you're trying to go big in one turn and storm off.
I think that's very true. That's a good point, Seth. Especially, when you play Metallurgic Summonings, to go back on your older point about just the fact that you can pass a turn and not necessarily cast anything, but it will deter attacks just on the threat of casting an instant spell and then blowing out your opponents. You play this early as a combo deck, you probably will deter attacks for the next following turns until you're good and ready to go off. And High Tide is definitely a thing in Commander like it is in other formats where it's legal. And you could still go for like a Grixis, for example, combo deck with High Tide and Dark Rituals and everything, and use this as like a superior Past in Flames.
The thing I want to do most with it is just turn a whole bunch of take an extra turn spells into part the Water Veil. So essentially you get
Oh my
a
god.
5/5 or a 6/6 or an 11/11 and get an extra turn, so you get to attack, cast another one. So that's a deck that I want to build. It's probably not good, but it sounds really fun.
Yeah.
Number 8 on our list. Then it's worth mentioning Kaladesh is an artifact-based set, so we have a lot of artifacts on our set. Our first artifact is Gurapur Orrery. So, Tomer, this card does a lot of interesting things. What do you think about it?
So I think most people are going to look at this card and say it's a group hug card, and it could be because it does help everybody play additional lands each turn, and it can potentially help everybody draw 3 cards. So in group hug decks, they might want to run Orrery just to help everybody out. But I'm not the biggest group hug fan, and I'm more excited about it for a different deck, the lands deck. Land decks generally dump their hand very, very quickly, I find out, and you need to restock. When you're running cards like Summer Bloom, when you get to play additional 3 lands on a turn, or Mana Bond, where you get to just like dump all land cards from your hand to the battlefield and you discard the rest of them. These just throw lands into the battlefield as quickly as possible, and you're left with nothing in hand. Girapur Orrery can then come in and draw you 3 more cards, give you more fuel. Or if you're a lands deck and you don't have something like Summer Bloom, you don't have something like Mana Bond, lets you just play more of your lands quickly and then just more naturally dump your hand to then draw more cards. So in a land deck, I'm almost positive Girapur Orrery is going to be a staple for them because it just helps you out so much more than it helps out your opponents.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I also think Group Hug, as you mentioned. The other place I potentially like this card, and I know these decks aren't the most popular in Commander, but it makes a really good top end deck if you're or top end card if you're somehow playing an aggressive deck. Because in Commander, like you see our games on Commander Clash, people are playing Reliquary Tower because they want to have 15 cards in their hand. Like a lot of decks are built around having a handful of cards. If you're playing an aggro deck, there's a decent chance that this is going to be draw 3 for you every turn if you just dump your hand, why it's unlikely that your opponent's going to actually get empty-handed because that's not what their deck is built around. So I like the potential of maybe enabling red or white-based aggressive decks that don't have good card draw options and kind of breaking the symmetry that way by taking advantage of cards that can really get on the battlefield fast. So I don't know if that will make those decks good enough to really be competitive in Commander, but I think that's another potential use.
Yeah, if you have a aggressive curve and you can just dump your hand out much faster than a typical EDH deck, then you're going to be drawing a lot more cards than your opponents. And yeah, that might be the tipping point to get past all your opponents and start edging them out.
Yeah, so moving on to number 7 on our list, we have an uncommon of all things, Armorcraft Judge. So, Tomer, what makes this uncommon worthy to be on our top 10 list?
So the 3 little words, draw a card. And this one draws a lot of cards. The +1/+1 counter archetype is heavily supported. Almost every single modern set that I can think of has some sort of creatures that have +1/+1 counters or points +1/+1 counters on them. So Armorcraft Judge is coming into an archetype that has been heavily supported and has just a lot of different ways to build them. One of the most popular ways, I think, is Vorol of the Hallclad, but there's a bunch of others. And Armorcraft Judge comes in and now lets you draw cards off your +1/+1 counter creatures, refueling you and letting you keep on trucking. The best comparison I can see to Armorcraft Judge is Inspiring Call, which also lets you draw a card for each creature you control +1/+1 counter, and it makes them indestructible. It's an instant. And both of them are really good. Inspiring Call I've had a lot of fun with in the past. Armorcraft Judge has the added bonus. It doesn't make your creatures indestructible at instant speed, but it is a creature itself, so it can get +1/+1 counters. It can be tutored easily. It can be balanced and blinked easily. It has a lot of extra synergies for just being a creature, so I think it's going to be a new staple in the archetype.
And it's nice to have some redundancy. Like having two cards that let you draw a card for each creature with a +1/+1 counter is definitely a big deal in 100-card singleton formats where there's a lot of variance involved in what cards you draw. So the more of those, the better, I would say. And it's pretty easy to put counters on things. Like there's a lot of different ways to put a +1/+1 counter on your entire team. Moving on to 6 on our list, we're heading into the world of black cards with a Fabricate card. This is Marionette Master. So, Tomer, what about this one?
So Marionette Master is mostly a nod towards the combo decks. It's a fine card by itself. It's kind of like a Siege Gang commander where you play a 1/3 and you get 3 1/1 artifact creatures, and there's a bunch of stuff you can do with them. Like you can, most obvious one is you can just skull clamp them and draw a whole bunch of cards, which always makes me happy. But there's an infinite combo that she does really well with, and it involves Ashnod's Altar, where you can sacrifice a creature to make 2 colorless mana, and Nim Deathmantle, where it does a bunch of things, but the most relevant thing is when the creature that it is equipped to dies, you can pay 4 mana, and if you do, then you return it to the battlefield with the Nim Deathmantle attached to it. So an easy combo would be, you play Marionette Master, you make all these creature tokens, you sacrifice them to the altar, pinging your opponents with the Marionette Master. Then you sacrifice Marionette Master, return it with Nim Deathmantle because you have all that floating mana, and you just repeat the combo over and over until all your opponents are dead. It's a 3-card combo. It's very easy to pull off because in black you just have lots of tutors, and 2 of them are artifacts, so there's even more ways to get those artifacts into play. And it basically takes away the need for a 4th card in the combo to win the game, like Blood Artist.
That's a really good point. It's kind of a self-contained combo in that sense, and anything that brings combos from 4 pieces down to 3 pieces is a pretty big deal. It's much harder. It takes you many more tutor effects to set up a 4-card combo than it does a 3-card combo, and I mean, it's not horrible all by itself. Even when things are going poorly, it's going to make you a bunch of chump blockers, which hopefully keeps you alive. And if you're playing black, you likely have reanimation effects anyway, so it can kind of buy you time until you set up the infinite combo as well, all by itself, just by making a bunch of chump blockers. And then hopefully you get it back with a reanimate or something when you're ready to combo off. So I think it seems like a pretty sweet card and seems like a fun deck to play. I've always wanted to build an Ashnod's Altar combo deck. Haven't done it yet, but it's on my list of things to do, and maybe this will be the card that pushes me to do it.
Yeah, I think she's great in combo, and she's also a great deterrent. Like, if your opponent has a Creeping Corrosion, well, they know if they cast it and they blow up all your artifacts, they're going to be the ones losing life. So it's something to keep in mind as your opponent, and that works in your favor for Marionette Master. But yeah, the combo itself is very powerful. Even as a 6-mana card, the fact that you're shaving off an extra card is great.
Moving into the top 5 on our list, we have a Simic Mythic Rashmi Eternities Crafter. So, Tomer, where does this fall in the hierarchy of Simic commanders? How close to the top of the list is this?
Oof. I don't think she's the best. I feel like, oh no, what's her name? She is a Simic guild leader, and she has +1/+1 counters and draw is equal to the size of a creature.
Prime Speaker Zagana? Something like that?
That's the one, yes. I think Prime Speaker Zagana, or maybe the first one, the Elf dude, Elf Mutant dude, were probably the best for Simics in just terms of raw power. But I would say Rashmi is my favorite in terms of just fun. She gets to cast a lot of spells and then encourages you to cast more because then she gets to cast more off the top of your library. It's great. So I like casting spells. I like the fact that Rashmi basically lets me double up on the spells that I cast. And she requires a lot of setup, I would say. She wants flash because then you can cast spells on your opponent's turns, and then that just lets you use her trigger more and more. She wants library manipulation, so if you could put something like Worldly Tutor or Mystical Tutor to set up the top card of your library to be something that you for sure can cast, and then she's even better. And she also wants a lot of mana because if you're, let's say you cast a spell on your turn to get to trigger her ability and then cast a spell on your opponent's turn and then your next opponent's turn, and et cetera, et cetera, you need a lot of mana to do it, but green is really well set up, and they have cards like Seaborn Mune, which untaps all of your lands, so you can keep doing everything. She requires a lot of setup, but once you actually have her set up, she is a super fun card, I would say.
And I mean, in the worst case, even without the setup, it's still basically a one-sided Howling Mine. It's going to draw you an extra card every turn, and if you can cast cards on your opponent's turn, it can draw you multiple cards each turn cycle, because even if you can't cast that card, it still gets to go into your hand. So the worst case of Rashmi isn't really that bad. Like, drawing an extra card every turn is still pretty powerful, and sooner or later, because you're drawing these extra cards, that will help you potentially draw into your combo pieces to generate even more value. So I really like it as well. I definitely could imagine playing it as a commander in a really sweet Simic deck. It's in good colors for flashing things in. You have that Simic land that can give things flash. You have the Leyline in blue that can let you cast things with flash. So there's a lot of ways to build around it in those colors. Would this also be a card you would play in the 99, or is this mostly a commander?
I think she's better when you have stuff to support her, but I think I'd still play her in the 99. She's just a really fun card, and I'm very excited to play her. Out of all the legendary creatures from the set, she's definitely the top choice for me.
Moving on to number 4 on our list, back to artifacts. We have Philharmonica, as I like to call it, or a Panharmonicon. So this might be my favorite card for Commander in the entire set, but let me hear what you have to say, Tomer.
So the funny thing is that Panharmonicon does nothing by itself. When you play it, it's just a 4 mana nothing. But it has so many synergies in Commander. So many of the best creatures and just have these enter the battlefield triggers that you can abuse, like Eternal Witness and Prime Speaker Zagana or Siege Gang Commander. All those creatures that see so much play in Commander have an enter the battlefield ability trigger that makes them so good. And Panharmonicon doubles those triggers, and also artifacts too. So any deck that runs with lots of enter the battlefield abilities is going to love Panharmonicon, is going to be a staple. 2 decks that I can think of right off the top of my head. Porphyros, God of the Forge, loves playing creatures. When they enter the battlefield, he deals 2 damage to each opponent. Now you're dealing 4 damage to each opponent. If you have Panharmonicon on the board and you have Porphyros, God of the Forge on the board, and you play Siege Gang Commander, you're making 6 tokens and you're dealing 28 damage with Porphyros, God of the Forge. That's insane. And then you have decks like Brago, King Eternal, or Rune of the Hidden Realm that are all about enter the battlefield triggers, and Panharmonicon is an easy staple in that one too.
You have so many good ideas, Tomer. All I want to do is cast Muldrifter. That's all. Just play this and cast Muldrifter, and I'm happy. I don't need to burn people out for 28 damage, whatever. But no, there's just so many synergies. This feels like a card that, even without building around it, you're going to get value in a lot of decks.
It's so open-ended. That's the real fun about it. I can't even imagine how many different interactions there are, and I'm sure there's going to be comment sections saying sweet synergies, and I can't wait to read them too, because there's just like a lot of really cool ways you can use Panharmonicon. So it's going to be probably the most fun card to see how it pans out.
Well, speaking of fun cards, we actually have 2 Planeswalkers on our list, and this one's a unique one for a reason I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. Number 3, we have Nyssa Vital Force. So, Tomer, what makes Nyssa different than most Planeswalkers when it comes to seeing play in Commander?
So for Nyssa Vital Force, it's all about her ultimate. Her ultimate is bananas. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card, which is kind of like a one-sided Horn of Greed for just you. And it's an emblem, so it can never get removed until the end of the game. And what's really unique about her is she starts at 5 loyalty. She has a +1 ability. That means her ultimate is ready after just 1 turn. And It's one of the very few commanders that can ultimate so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it is super quick to the ultimate, which makes it really unique. Works with Oath of Gideon, we talked about even. Like, a lot of Planeswalkers work with Doubling Season. There's very few that, if you have an Oath of Gideon, they just immediately ultimate, so that makes it even faster. And drawing an extra card every time you play a land is great. The other thing that I think is somewhat overlooked is the -3 is actually pretty powerful too. You play a lot of good cards, things die in Commander. Being able to get a permanent back from your graveyard is a pretty reasonable ability in a pinch. Like, the big payoff is obviously the emblem, but there's going to be situations where just being able to play it and get back your best creature, your most important artifact or enchantment, doing that is going to swing the game in your favor as well.
I think her -3 is very powerful. It's essentially Nature Spiral, which is just a slightly more niche regrowth, but it's almost always going to be a regrowth. It gets basically anything you want. Her +1 ability is a little bit of ramp. It's also a temporary creature, so you can get in there for damage. And ultimate is insanely good. I would play her basically in any deck that I think can actually pull off letting her survive for one turn to get her ultimate, and you're running like regular just green land ramp like Sky Shroud Claim, Rampant Growth, Nature's Lore, all those green staples. Super Friends, most green decks, she's great. She's really good.
Well, rank number 2, we don't have just one card, we have an entire cycle of cards. And you can probably guess, but it's the Gear Hulks, the new Titans, the new Souls, whatever you think of them. So, Tomer, I know you have some ideas about where they fit in specific archetypes and some thoughts on each of them, so I'm going to let you handle this section. What do you think of the Gear Hulks?
All right, so before we go into the specific ones, I want to say how good they are in general, because they all share certain themes. Each one is an artifact creature, which means they have a ton of synergy and support in Commander. There's a lot of tutors that are specifically for creatures. If you're running the Verdurous Scalehawk, you can use Green Sun Zenith. If not, you're using like Worldly Tutor, Sylvan Tutor, all these really good tutors to get specifically creatures out in green. If you're playing black, you can reanimate it, animate dead it, all sort of graveyard shenanigans. And if you're in red, they have a lot of basically Goblin Welder effects where you can sacrifice an artifact to return an artifact. That's what Goblin Welder does. Daretti Scrap Savant does the exact same thing. There's a couple other cards that do very similar abilities. So there's a lot of artifact synergies, a lot of creature synergies to make sure they enter the battlefield without even paying their full converted mana cost. So that is amazing. Also, there's like bounce and blink effects to also use or enter the battlefield abilities over and over again. So I think they're really good in basically any deck, but in decks that can reuse or enter the battlefield ability and cheat them into play, they're even better. And then onto the specific Gear Hulks. Cataclysmic Gear Hulk, I think, is amazing for control decks. Any deck that doesn't really focus too heavily on throwing a lot of permanents on the board, you can just sit back and then wait for the opportune time to drop this and start weeding out your opponent's permanents. It's especially good against decks that focus on a certain type of permanent. So against an artifact deck, you're cutting them down to just one artifact. If you're against an Enchantress deck, same thing. If you're against a Super Friends deck, or you're against a Token Swarm deck, or any type of Swarm deck, you're really cutting them down. So I think Cataclysmic Gear Hulk is really good for decks that are just not too overly committed to the board state, and then you can just really punish your opponents for overextending.
Having your opponent choose is a little bit questionable. We see Tragic Arrogance, and maybe it's just that we're used to Tragic Arrogance. The comparison makes Cataclysmic Gear Hulk look bad, but someone pointed out to me that you can, of course, keep the Gear Hulk as your artifact and then keep another creature, so there's a chance you can kind of break the symmetry a bit that way. So I think the White Gear Hulk is fairly solid, but somewhat limited in the type of deck you want to put it in, like you were saying.
Moving on to Noxious Gear Hulk, I think it's pretty straightforward. You get to destroy a creature, you gain life. That's always a relevant ability.
I think with Noxious Gear Hulk, it's one of the Gear Hulks that you can just jam in any black deck. Like, it's just a good, solid card. You don't really need to build around it. It's a Shriek Maul or a Necrotol that has upside to gain you life. It's a bigger creature, so I think you can just jam this in most black decks if you want to.
And then Rigorous Gearhulk would probably be another one that I love. I love all of them, but this one is a little bit higher up. We were talking about the +1/+1 counter deck. This is a really efficient way of putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures. It's essentially like a hard cast Blessings of Nature, which is just a sorcery that does that distribution of 4 +1/+1 counters. But you also have a 4/4 trample creature. It's also an artifact creature, all these shenanigans that I mentioned.
And just an 8/8 for 5 is pretty big in some situations. So you get no matter how you divide up the counters, you're going to get a lot of value for its mana cost.
I would say then after that would probably be, which is just like a mega Snapcaster. It can easily ambush a creature that's attacking you. And it can also just bring back a collect counterspell, or it can draw you cards with Dig Through Time, or it could probably do both with Mystic Confluence. So there's a lot of wiggle room there. It's best for Spellslinger decks that are going to have a high concentration of instants to choose from. So it's not going to fit in any deck that just has like maybe 4 or 5 instants, but in ones that have high amounts of it, it's going to be quite powerful, I would say.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite Gearhulks as well. There's a lot of value there, and in Commander, depending on the situation, you can get a lot of value out of it. In constructed or more like tournament-centered competitive events, Snapcaster is often better because you want to be flashing back lightning bolts and brainstorms and really efficient cheap stuff. Torrential Gearhulk can flash back random, like you said, dig through times and expensive instants that would be kind of hard to have enough mana to do with Snapcaster. So there is some upside there, and the body is definitely much bigger. So,
and then I would say my favorite one out of all of them is the red one, Combustible Gearhulk, which basically it's a 6/6 first strike, which is already a huge body for the Gearhulk standards, and it has my favorite ability, which says draw 3 cards. It does say may have you draw 3 cards, and that will immediately have a comparison to Browbeat, which is a totally bad card. It says any player may have Browbeat deal 5 damage to them, or you draw 3 cards. This one is way better because you choose the target opponent who will make you do the choice. So either you do it politically, where you say, hey, if you let me draw 3 cards, I'll do something for you. It could be something as simple as I'm not going to attack you for a turn, or it could be something like I'm going to take out a mutual threat of ours if you let me draw 3 cards. Stuff like that will help just get people on your side, help them agree to your terms. Or you could just choose somebody who's at a low life total. Let's say somebody's sitting at like 10 or 15 life, and you're kind of strong-arming them to let you draw 3 cards, or they can just randomly take 10 or more damage to the face, which is something they want to avoid. So I think Combustible Gearhulk's draw 3 abilities very consistent in Commander, or is going to be more consistent than you would expect.
Yeah, and it's a really big body. A 6/6 with first strike is going to be really hard to deal with in combat, at least on the ground. And with blink effects, reanimation effects, it can really get out of control depending on how you construct your deck. But if you can blink this multiple times, there's a chance you can just kill someone or completely refill your hand. And either way, you're coming out super far ahead. So I think this is one of my least favorite for Standard, but I think it's one of my most favorite for Commander. I still like Torrential Gearhulk, but this one is very good as well.
Yeah, I think the entire cycle is amazing. Their Into the Battlefield effects are really powerful. They always get compared to the Titans, and it's true that as an engine, they don't have an attack trigger, so they're not as good if they stick around. But their Enter the Battlefield abilities, I would say, are a little bit better for multiplayer. And the fact that you can have so many ways of reanimating them and abusing those Enter the Battlefield triggers makes them just as good as the Titans in my book.
And number 1 on our list, the top card from Kaladesh for Commander, we have Ether Flux Reservoir. So, Tomer, were you surprised that they printed this card without saying your life total being X amount above your starting life total, which is what we've seen with some of these cards in recent days to take care of the what is it, Sierra Avatar? Is that the one?
Yeah. Oh, Sarah Ascendant, I think it is.
Ascendant. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they've done that to get rid of that problem where stuff that is balanced for standard is overpowered in commander. Was this surprising to you to see this made this way?
Well, I'm not even sure the standard implications. My immediate thought process was it has no implication for standard, and they just threw it in specifically for commander. Um, I think the 50 life total is still a bit low, considering life gain archetypes are a thing that is popular in commander. Um, so yeah, I'm a little bit shocked that you just have to pay 50 life, but I guess it's not pay 50 life, you win the game. It's just pay 50 life and you can do 50 damage to a player, which is pretty much kills them instantly, or a creature if you really want to. You flaunt your life gain. uh, but yeah, this card is absurd for the life gain deck. It's an auto include staple, best card in the archetype, I would say. First of all, it gains you a ton of life. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. So it starts off, if you just cast it that turn and then you cast something else, you gain 2 life, and then 3 life, and then 4 life, and on and on. And that's just a very consistent way of gaining life and triggering abilities like Well of Lost Dreams, which lets you draw cards equal to the amount of life you gained if you pay extra mana. Carl of the Ghost Council, which gets a bunch of counters on him whenever you gain life. There's a bunch of abilities that like gaining life and use that to their advantage. And then, of course, you have the Doom Cannon. You pay 50 life and you just kill an opponent, and it's amazing. And if you start at like above 50 life and you just drop the Reservoir, you can immediately use it. That's insane. Wow. You would think that it would be like at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 50 life. No, no, no. It's just you can just cast it and then boom, somebody's dead. Doom Cannon done.
Yeah, that's the surprising part because some of the weird janky finishers for life gain, Test of Endurance, I think, Felidar Sovereign, they do require you waiting to your next upkeep. This one, like you said, just can do it right away. I think that you really need to be a fairly dedicated life gain deck. The thing is that somewhat balances this card, I think, in my opinion, is if you're playing a normal deck and you get up to 55 life, sure you can kill someone, but you're going to be dropping down to like 5 life, and you're probably going to die from the other people. So I think you want to really be gaining a lot of life to make this good. The other interesting part, and I didn't catch this on the first read, I just assumed that you sacrificed it to deal the damage. It sits on the battlefield. So if you actually get up to like 150 life, you can just 50 all of your opponents. Like, it doesn't go away. You don't have to try to reanimate it or anything. It just sits there. So if you kill someone, you can build up your life total again and just kill someone else as well. So that part of it was pretty surprising because there are some cards that can just gain a ton of life in Commander, and when you're starting at 40, that's not very far away from 50. So
Yeah, it gets active pretty quickly. It's a little bit risky again, as you said. Like if you're at 55 life and you use this, you're left very vulnerable to your remaining opponents. So you don't want to be just popping it off as soon as you can. You have to have like a good board state and feel confident about surviving to keep using it in the future. But just not even using its Doom Cannon ability, the life gain is really good for life gain decks. Lots of triggers. And I just think it's going to be amazing. I guess the one thing is that life gain decks generally get hated out very quickly if all things are even on the rest of the board. Just because people know that if you're a life gain deck that is really high on life, then you're going to be doing absurd stuff like this. So I remember when you played a life gain deck, everybody attacked you by default, even if you didn't have any threats whatsoever on the table, just because we want to keep your life total down. So I think that's going to be just a normal balancing point with these type of cards. This is just one more reason for you to attack the life gain player and make sure they're not over 50 life.
The other thing I love about this card is if you can get up to over 50 life, you can really use this politically. You can be like, if you attack me, I'm gonna kill you. Yes, I'm gonna die. I know I'm gonna die. I'm gonna go down to like 5 life, and I'm gonna die immediately. But if you don't do what I want, I don't care. I'm just gonna take both of us out. So I like that potential too. It's like the ultimate spite card if you have enough life to use it. Like you can just randomly take someone out if they do something you don't like. Consequences be damned.
That sounds perfect for me too, because I'm a very spiteful commander player. You blow up my like wild growth? How dare you, Doom Cannon?
Oh, exactly.
It's gonna be lots of fun.
Oh, well, Tomer, do you have any final thoughts on the way out the door about anything? Kaladesh as a whole for Commander? Anything else?
I think that about covers it. I'm really excited for the next set because I'm hoping we're gonna get the return to the energy counters, and then I can start talking about that as the deck archetype, because there's a lot of sweet cards out there that generate energy and do fun stuff with energy, but there's just not enough of them for me to really shine a spotlight on them just yet. So hopefully we see it again, and then I can start talking about energy counters as a deck archetype, because it's pretty cool.
Well, that's been our top 10 Commander cards from Kaladesh. So, Tomer, thanks so much for hanging out. It was a ton of fun.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone else for watching. So, Tomer and I will be back next set to talk about some more top 10 cards for Commander. In the meantime, make sure to check out Commander Clash, where we're playing cards like this every single week and having a great time. So, thanks again, Tomer. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and we will talk to you soon.